The number one thing that's on our dashboards is availability. How
Mhm.
much is the site up? And that has a lot to do with sustainability, right? So if it's really windy today, we're going to see some interesting dynamics in the data center. If it's not, but it's really hot out, we're going to see some interesting dynamics on the data center because prices will spike. So we look at availability, which is sort of like a Soluna term that encompasses a lot of different data points that give you a sense of the current and potential uptime for our data centers.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Future of CRE Sustainability. I'm your host, Sean Swentek. Today I'm speaking with John Belizaire, Chief Executive Officer at Soluna. John, thanks so much for joining me today.
Nice to be here, Sean. Thanks for having me on the show.
I always check with my guests before and that I'm pronouncing their name right, and I did not with you. I hope Belizaire was correct.
You did a great job. That could have gone many ways, and I've heard it all sorts of ways. But yes, Belizaire, John Belizaire.
Excited to dive with you today, John. So let's jump right in. As someone who's built multiple successful tech companies, what was the initial spark into your journey in renewable energy with Soluna?
Well, I was introduced to the opportunity by a member of the board of one of the companies I was running. We had just sold the company. I was sitting by a pool, starting to write a long series of cathartic articles about the experience being CEO of that company. And I got a call from this gentleman who's head of a family office, private equity firm, and they were doing a bunch of renewable energy work in Morocco. And he invited me to come and look at this project that they were having a challenge with, and that was a wind project. And it had all of these challenges on getting all of the power that would be produced there monetized. And I told him point blank, I don't know anything about renewable energy. And he mentioned blockchain at the time. I told him, I don't know anything about that either. I don't see how I can help you. I'm a software guy. And because we had a long-standing relationship, he invited me to the office. He says, look, why don't you just come in, talk to my team, educate yourself. And I said, I'm not doing anything. I'm supposed to go on this trip to the beach and I'll stop by. And I stopped by and started digging into, the energy dynamic on the continent. This particular project was in the southern part of Morocco, and they were developing this very large wind project in what has to be one of the best wind regions in the world. Literally, if you go there at the airport, there are only two types of people on the plane, maybe three. One is government, because a lot of government people come down because it's like a big region. Two, it's tourists, right? People who are coming there to hang out and enjoy the beaches. But all of the tourists are carrying this giant bag, which is a kite and their surfboard, because it is literally the best kite surfing in the world because the wind is so strong there. It actually has a name. It's called the Harmattan wind.
Wow.
And then the third category of passengers on the planes coming in and out of there are renewable energy people, you know? And so we were having difficulty developing the project because the grid wasn't ready to accept the magnitude of power the wind farm would produce. And in our research and trying to find ways to solve the problem, it occurred to us that computing would be the perfect solution. The question was, how do you find load for generation, right? How do you get that generation to load? And we took a lateral approach and inverted the question and said, what if you could bring load to generation?
Mhm.
How would you get load to generation? What kind of load could you bring down there? And that opened up a whole bunch of possibilities. And then it became clear that computing, which is a distributed resource, blockchain, or now Bitcoin mining, if you will, is a very compute intensive computing type of application. What if you can bring a data center that perform this type of computing to the plant? This could help solve our problem. And once we identified the solution, we realized that it was unlikely that we in this amazing wind area were the only ones that had this challenge. And in 2020, we started focusing our energy on, no pun intended, our energy on curtailment as a larger problem. And it turned out in 2020, when everybody was stuck at home, us included, hard to go down to the windy beach area. We started focusing on curtailed energy, and it turns out it's nearly a universal problem in clean energy development. And upwards of 30 to 40% of clean power generated on solar and wind farms can be curtailed or wasted, which decreases the profitability of these power plants. And so I'd say the journey, to answer your question, the journey started in a very windy part of the world, and that wind is now at our backs, helping us to solve a pretty big problem in the space.
Can you talk about how Soluna transforming the surplus renewable energy revolutionizes the economics
Around these power plants?
around renewable energy as a power source?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm very excited to talk about that. So you remember how I said, I know nothing about, renewable energy to the investor that wanted me to come and do this crazy thing. It turns out we know a lot now. We know a lot about project finance and structuring projects and how all of that capital goes into these. And depending on your audience is, these projects are, multi-$100 million projects, depending on the size, they could be even greater than that. We're now seeing some of the largest power plants in the country and beyond come talk to us about putting our data centers at those locations. And when you look at those project companies, how are they financed? Well, the capital stack has equity, so sponsor equity. Maybe there was a developer they bought the asset from, et cetera, that may have some equity in there. There's PTCs involved in these, so production tax credits. So there will be tax equity in there. There's debt, and there may be some cash equity players, et cetera, and other types of structures. Where all of those folks have different expectations on the return profile. Some of that equity capital may have come from very large pension funds that are expecting these projects to, generate a certain amount of revenue over a long period of time and generate a, low double digits to low single digits. I'm sorry, mid single digit sort of return, right? And what happens is the spreadsheet looks good. There's some testing on, potential curtailment. They build the project, energize it, and then what happens is all of a sudden there's a massive increase of curtailment that starts to build over a 4 to 5 year period. And all of a sudden, these projects start to lose money because the grid signal at that location sends them a negative price signal, which says, hey, you can't send your power. Well, we don't want you to send your power right now. And if you do, you got to pay to send it. So they come out of pocket to send the power out because they have to send the power out in order to produce the tax credits, which they're obligated to generate. And they can only do that until the revenue that's generated from the tax credits equals the cash that they would, have to pay to send the power. And then they're just like off.
Yep.
The project goes down. You'll start to see wind turbines being turned off. And so what we're doing, I like to say, I drive up with my truck with the little Circle Delta Soluna logo on it and say, hey, I notice half of your, wind turbines are not spinning there. And they're saying, yeah, what about it? And I said, well, I can solve that for you. And it says, how? We've tried everything. Batteries, we've been trying to get the grid to expand the power lines for some time. Now folks have explored, green hydrogen, and that's a very complex project, et cetera. There's just very few solutions to this problem. And we say, no, actually, we have a perfect solution. We're going to build a data center. That data center will buy all of your excess unused energy. And the power of that is that now when ERCOT says, for discussion purposes, hey, this wind farm is 100 megawatts, tomorrow, I only want you to send me 50 megawatts of that. And I built a 50 megawatt data center back there. So tomorrow when the wind farm is producing 100 megawatts and when the wind farm can produce 100 megawatts and would normally only be able to send 50 of that to the grid, right? But the grid says, you have to curtail, it's maxed at that 50. I build that data center now, it can produce 100 megawatts and only still send 50 to the grid, right? So it's still compliant, but it still made the other 50 megawatts and delivered that to us. They got paid a positive price. We turned that negative price they would have paid to a fixed positive price, and they get those PTCs. So you can start to see the economic advantages that get created by the introduction of this facility, because now all of a sudden the project is making lots of gravy, right? Because we turn that excess energy that would otherwise have made no revenue and maybe even cost them cash to generating revenue and putting cash into the business. And those PTCs get generated, right? They used to be use it or lose it. Now they're getting extended. But as you can see, what we've done is created a way to deliver economic value and advantage to those IPPs who can then look at this and say, hey, I now have a way to make revenue for power that otherwise would not have. I should build more of these things because I now have an embedded solution to the curtailment problem. That's how we help these projects completely transform their economic footprint. And we believe ultimately drive the continued development and growth of these types of projects. And that's our mission as a company, is to make renewable energy the dominant source of energy in the world. And I think we're already on our way to do that, and already on the world is sort of heading in that direction. I like to say everybody's in the back of a Tesla, heading into the future, although it's not super sexy to say Teslas anymore. let's say EV, back of an EV, heading into the future. So that's the way we do it.
From negative to positive sounds like a no-brainer for your average IPP.
100%, yeah.
What surprising challenges have you faced as you sort of merge your two worlds of computing and renewable energy? I know you mentioned being in software in the past.
One has been the learning curve. There's a lot to learn in this type of business. You have to not only learn about renewable energy, the flow of electrons, like how do you create a data center back there connected to the renewable energy substation and make sure the electrons flow to the data center. Like, how does that even work? And I didn't know that until I sort of understood more about, electrons and physics and the concept of desire. We basically are putting a big toaster back there. And the toaster's on, right? And electrons go to where they're wanted first, right? And we're the closest one. So it goes to us first before the grid, et cetera. You have to learn how to fit into these very complex project finance structures that have to work after you're added to the project, right? You can't break anything.
Yeah.
By way of example, people ask this or they miss this all the time that, let's say the wind farm has a 100 megawatt PPA attached to it. And so they're obligated to deliver that power downstream. And we have a data center back there. And when the project is not curtailed, it has the ability to send 100 megawatts. Well, we still need our 50 megawatts.
Yep.
So those electrons will still flow to us. And we're essentially, siphoning that energy. We call it a subtractive energy. And what we do is we've developed this very simple, clever approach to solving the problem. The downstream off-taker still has to get to 100 megawatts. And what happens within a, market-driven environment like ERCOT, the electrons are flowing through the grid all the time, right? So if somebody's drawing that 100 megawatts down the line, they're going to get 100 megawatts of electrons. But after the trading period is closed and there's settlement that has to happen, well, somebody owes ERCOT 50 megawatts worth of cash, right? And so we solve that problem by essentially making the project whole for the rates that they would have gotten for, we pay that price, right, for that subtractive energy. And so they have the cash to deliver that to ERCOT. So now everybody's happy. It took us a while to sort of think about how to solve that, what seems fairly simple the way I've described it, but it's not easy to do that structurally. So those are challenges we have to go through, that learning curve. On the computing side, how do you build a data center that's resilient to power loss in environments where power is intermittent? And how do you build a financial business around delivering services to customers where the power is intermittent? And how do you deal with getting connectivity for these computers and building them in these remote locations and making all of that work, that whole stack of things that need to work? So there's a lot of complexity to our business that we have, worked through. And then the last thing, all of those things are sort of, call it engineering and, business architecture problems. The most surprising challenges to us have been convincing the grid operator, for example, that our innovative solution was a good thing for the grid. The assumption is that if you have load behind the meter, it's breaking the sort of structural and financial incentives to support the build out of the grid, and you're using resources and all that kind of stuff. We go through those debates a lot, but the way we position it is, well, the grid is adding more and more flexible generation resources. And for the grid to deliver robust power using these resources, it needs another piece of technology, which is essentially energy storage capability, right? Or
Mm.
energy buffering, if you will. And that's like nearly impossible to build out unless you use this lateral approach. See, by bringing load that's not sort of fixed load, but flexible load, you actually retroactively deliver to the grid a value that would have cost them billions of dollars to build out. But I make all the CapEx investment, and I ultimately deliver a resource to the grid, which is a demand response flexible resource that creates that buffering for them, right? Otherwise, they would have to contract out for batteries and all sorts of other resources, which they do, or dispatchable generation, which they do. But this allows them to increase, the capabilities of the grid to be more resilient to this ever-changing power dynamic that's happening. And we think that's going to accelerate now with the emergence of AI and how that's going to change everything. So it's been surprising, I guess, that grid operators don't see the both economic and technical advantage that comes from this new type of innovation. And that's changing slowly but surely. But that was something we had to deal with. So it took a lot of education, a lot of, collaborative discussions around this, and we've sort of found our way through. And then the last thing is people. I've been an entrepreneur now for approaching 25 years, maybe more, because COVID kind of warps things. So maybe, and it never, ceases to surprise me how much you have to take into account people and human behavior in the innovation business. People are generally resistant to taking new risk and investing in new technology, or partnering with companies that are doing something new, and going to these projects that have all sorts of different constituencies that are involved in the project. I mentioned them earlier, the equity, tax equity, debt, all that kind of stuff. Nobody wants to create any kind of new risk
Right.
to a project like that, and getting all of them to sort of come to the table and agree on how to, bless this and what they need to know and all that kind of stuff proves to be very challenging. That's why I tell people it's not easy to do what we do at Soluna. It looks easy after it's all built and running and humming, but you don't understand, like, developing these projects are very challenging. And a lot of it has to do with good old fashioned, relationship building, education, and preemptively addressing, the most likely concerns and objections to a solution like this.
Well said. How are you seeing property developers react to the opportunity of on-site computing powered by renewable energy?
You mean traditional real estate property
Hey,
development?
it's just and data centers, anyone who's developing properties, what is the appetite like for, or the even the understanding of the opportunity around using renewable energy to power those sites?
Good question. So I think that there is a grand awakening. I'll describe it as that. There's a grand awakening underway across the energy market, the data center market, the customer market, who traditionally are looking for data center solutions, right? For many years, the data center business has been a pretty not so sexy business, right? Nobody was talking about data centers. I mean, people knew they're out there. We hold our phones, use applications and so forth, but nobody really sort of gives a thought to where those data centers are located. But if you were to draw a map, what you would find is that they're pretty concentrated in their location. Virginia probably has the largest concentration of data centers on the planet, and they tend to be closer to population centers, closer to big internet hubs, closer to places where you have expertise and so forth. And so there is an entire industry. I was going to say cottage, but it's not exactly a cottage industry. It's
Yeah.
about billions of dollars, but it's definitely a whole industry that is architected around building data centers in a very specific way very specific location, and there's a whole stack, right, from the land developer all the way up to the full vertical data center operators. There's a new industry, I'll call that a cottage industry, where people are beginning to go further afield beyond those places and start to rethink where data centers can be built. They're in more rural areas of the country. They are now more and more close to or will be co-located with wind and solar farms because the primary search algorithm, if you will, is power now,
Yep.
right? It's not so much, land, proximity to the user. It's like we need gigawatts of power for this stuff and we need it now.
Yep.
And that's changing. As I said, it's changing the entire industry. You are now seeing some of the largest funds in the world, and we saw this in the renewable energy space. Actually, Sean, you saw during COVID when there was this grand awakening, much like this, that hey, wow, this fossil stuff really sucks. Like we should get rid of that stuff. We need to be more self-sufficient from an energy perspective, and we need to be more sustainable, and let's go big on this. And all of a sudden, there was this grand awakening, and you had so much capital come into the renewable energy space. That's why you have all these curtailment problems, right? You have a large concentration of projects that are located in the same area, right? Trying to get all of their power onto the same limited grid space, that it completely transformed the renewable energy space. Renewable energy is now the cheapest form of energy. We can argue about it out there, folks who are still pro fossil fuels, but renewable energy still cost is going down. You can build much bigger scalable facilities, and they're being built all around the world now. And you're now seeing a similar thing. So you had funds going and buying these development companies, these big renewable energy developers, big IPPs became bigger, and big pension funds actually started to vertically integrate. They're like, you developers and funds and everything, you guys are telling us you can deliver these products. You know what? We can do this ourselves. Like, why should we give you the fees? They just went and bought platforms. The
Yeah.
whole, renewable energy it was just amazing to me. Like I went to the wind and solar conference maybe 3 years ago. I was amazed,
Yeah.
still learning, right, from the fire hose. Same thing is happening now in the data center space. You are now looking at that, right? It's a project, right? Like just like anything else. Like you have to develop it, you have to find the land sites, you got to find good connectivity, and everybody's trying to A, build the biggest platform possible, and B, develop something that is unique, something that's going to differentiate them to attract capital. And the key differentiator right now is how can you find a way to get access to, proprietary assets and sites that you can develop large facilities on. You're talking about sites that can, start in the hundreds but get to the gigawatts very fast.
Hmm.
And then second, how can you do it faster than anybody else? And that means leapfrogging the interconnection queues that are just getting longer every day. And the solution is to go co-located, right?
Yep.
Go behind the meter and build the data center at the location of these power plants. But this is important, and for all the folks who are sort of in the grid in the grid operators out there, utilities, but don't do it in a way that decreases the reliability of the grid.
Yep.
So showing up to a nuclear plant or a big gas plant and saying, hey, we want to buy all of your power, period. It is no longer going to the grid. We're taking it offline. So we're going off grid with like a 400 or 500 megawatt facility. At Soluna, we like to say, no bueno. That's no bueno, right?
Yeah.
But if you do like what Soluna does, where we're essentially integrating to a resource that is still available to the grid, we're adding a data center that has flexibility capabilities so we can return power to the grid when needed. You now have enhanced the grid and accelerated your ability to build, the next generation facility for the future of computing. That's what's changing in the space. You're basically seeing a whole new stack being built.
It's exciting times. How are you seeing AI and other things, machine learning, et cetera, change energy management for commercial buildings, data centers, et cetera? What are you seeing in that space?
AI is changing everything. I was in DC earlier this year at a conference put on by Latitude Media. It's called Transition AI. I was on a panel that was talking about what we just talked about, sort of like what's the new way of building data centers that people never heard of. But there was a series of panels that were talking about how AI is changing the way we pretty much do everything in energy. There's AI now involved in the planning process. Planning is like the place that is most ripe for the application of AI, right? What's the optimization problem? It's like, where is our demand coming from? Well, data centers obviously these days, but seriously, like, where's our demand coming from? And what's the best stack of power generation resource, right, mixture to deliver on that? And then once that's been met, what's the best way to continue to forecast that, right? And AI, it turns out, is better than us at doing that, right? Solving those types of problems is perfect for AI. Looking at the grid infrastructure itself and finding places where maintenance needs to be enhanced, upgrades need to be made, and highlighting those areas based on data about the usage and future usage of that infrastructure. Everything from power line management, tree pruning, to upgrading the bandwidth of these lines to deliver more power to a particular location. That's all now being tested in a number of the different energy markets, because you'd have to be out of your mind not to be using this technology at this point.
Right.
But you would be surprised that there is some concern about its efficacy and how well it can do things the way they've been done before, through more long, drawn out, arduous processes around planning. And what they're finding through some of these POCs is it's not only, matching, but exceeding their expectations on the use of that technology. I think AI, just taking a step back from energy, is going to be one of the greatest technologies that we've come up with as a species. And I think if you're listening to this and you're not using it, learning about it as much as possible, you're lost. I mean, I hate to say it, but we finally have reached the level of this technology where it truly has the ability to accelerate just about everything that we do.
You're going to be left behind.
Yeah, no question.
John, I'd love to move to some lightning round questions. I'm asking all my guests these 5 questions. I want to get people's immediate quick response. So 1 sentence, 2 or 3 sentences max. I'm excited to hear your thoughts on these. So number 1, solar, wind, or other. What's your bet for the dominant renewable energy source in the commercial real estate data center sector by 2030?
I'd have to say solar, because it's just so much easier to build. There's more investment being made. And now, within our current regulatory and, the current administration, I think solar would be a good bet to invest in. Its cost has come down a lot, and it's being built just all around the country. And the beauty of it, you can mix solar and batteries and actually build some really exciting microgrid solutions. So I think you're going to see a lot more solar get built.
I'd love to hear that. What's one property technology solution that you've seen or used that's exceeded your expectations and what it delivers?
We don't do a lot of that, but in my sort of entrepreneurial days, I've seen these really advanced sort of property management and sort of field management solutions that are really helpful. That's what I would say. I think you're going to see a lot more of that too. Sort of AI-driven optimization solutions for property management platforms are going to be really, really exciting to see come out.
Building management and service management solutions.
Correct. Yeah. So managing contractors, managing the design of different facilities, thermodynamics, sustainability aspects. Where do you source power? Should we use the solar panels on the roof today, or should we burn some oil? That sort of thing.
When you wake up in the morning, what's the first site metric, sustainability metric on one of your sites that you're checking to make sure things are the way they're supposed to be?
The number one thing that's on our dashboards is availability. How
Mhm.
much is the site up? And that has a lot to do with sustainability, right? So if it's really windy today, we're going to see some interesting dynamics in the data center. If it's not, but it's really hot out, we're going to see some interesting dynamics on the data center because prices will spike. So we look at availability, which is sort of like a Soluna term that encompasses a lot of different data points that give you a sense of the current and potential uptime for our data centers.
Love it. Complete this sentence. The biggest myth about green facilities is.
Oh, the biggest myth about green facilities is that they're not the same in terms of uptime, reliability, scalability as traditional tier 3 or 4 facilities. That is absolutely not true. Just because you're using green electrons, and in fact, just because you're behind the meter or co-located with a green site does not mean that the robustness of the data center solution has decreased. It actually is equivalent, if not better, right? Because now you can get the same level of reliability and uptime at a much lower carbon footprint and equal scalability, and even because of our particular design, much better pricing. And so when you combine those two things, it's like you got to be out of your mind for not investing in more green stuff. So I don't want to say people listening to this are out of their mind, but I think you need to change your mind. That's for sure.
All right, final question here. If you had 10 million or 100 million, whatever it would take to invest in one sustainability upgrade for your property right now, any property you have, what would it be?
I would definitely invest in microgrids. So the typical data centers use gas-fired turbines or your traditional diesel, right, as the resiliency solution, if you will. And at our facilities going forward, we want to build resiliency solutions that are also sustainable. So that might be the combination of solar, battery, and other types of really cool technology coming out right now around sustainability. So microgrids, which were sort of this cute little thing that would build in parking lots and stuff like that, is actually becoming an industrial enterprise class solution. Here in New York, JFK, they're building like a
Yep.
huge backup system that is a mix of different technologies. Good friend of mine is the CEO of the company doing that, and it's very exciting to see that. And you're going to see a lot of that with the rise in data centers too.
That's such a cool project. I was reading about that recently. John, we could talk about this forever. This is a topic that a lot of our listeners are keen to learn more about. I had a bunch more questions we didn't have time for today. Maybe I can send them to you. You can get back to me and I can upload your answers to the listing on the site if you're amenable to that.
Yeah,
In the meantime, if people want to learn more about Soluna and your work and what you're doing, where's the best place for them to go?
we're everywhere. I would start with solunacomputing.com. That's our website. You can learn about what we do, our services. If you're an IPP, you can learn about our curtailment assessment. That's where we help you understand what a data center would do for your projects. We are on LinkedIn. Just search for the Soluna company page on LinkedIn. You can search for me. I'm pretty active as well. We're on X. You can get the latest news on the company and what's happening with us on that platform as well. And on our website, there's a whole series of resources like video. You can go to YouTube, which kind of takes you through actual documentary style videos about our sites and our story. So I would hit those locations to learn more about Soluna.
John, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. To all my listeners, thank you for joining us on another episode of the Future of CRE Sustainability. I'll see you next time.